This locomotive might be quite diminutive, but it really does pack a welcome punch. This model is able to take in even some quite roughly laid track without it really causing any great issues. These will run reliably for hour after hour with no issues whatsoever. A big hello to you. It is amazing to see you, and I really do hope that you are well. I'm Jenny Kirk, welcoming you up here to Weir Yard, and today we're going back into the realms of 009, and you might remember that we reviewed the Peco and Kato small England locomotives when they came out some time ago, and as 009 modelers we've really been quite spoiled with the range of models that have come on the market. And it's not that long ago that us 009 modelers really were in the realms of having to make kits and scratch buildings, so it really is quite a luxury that we're getting so many of these narrow gauge prototypes coming through. The latest new model is again from the Peco and Kato collaboration. This time it's the turn of the large Englands. Now the name is a little bit misleading because if you aren't 100% familiar with the differences, the large Englands look an awful lot like the small Englands. There's not really that much difference in size between them. There are a few subtle differences though, and Peco and Kato have captured some of these on this all-new model release from them. They've also offered not just Welsh Pony, but also Little Giant, the long scrapped sister locomotive, which was outwardly pretty much identical, and they've also offered up a freelance liveried version in Southern Railway livery, which is a perfect accompaniment to anybody who models the Linton and Barnstaple scene. So today, with thanks to Peco, who very kindly loaned the channel one of the examples of the large England locomotives, we're going to take a good look at these and see whether they match up to what the small England models achieved, and whether this is something that you really should consider adding to your 009 fleet. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support comes from...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model 00 gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com and don't miss out on your latest loco.
I have to admit that I start out this review as very much a big fan of 009 models. It's a great scale and gauge combination because you've got all the range of scenic items in 00 that you can dip into, but 009 being narrow gauge really does get round some quite tight curves, and that means you can have a lot of model in a very small space, and that is something that anybody pushed for space really will enjoy. Don't forget that if you like the look of any of the models that you see featured in today's video, we've got a link in the description box down below to help you find all of them available on the market at what we believe to be the most competitive price out there. And don't forget as well to hit that like button, share this video and subscribe to the channel if you've not already done so. But let's get on and see just how good these large Englands really are. When Peco announced their partnership with Kato in Japan to produce the Ffestiniog Railway Small England, it really was quite a surprise. Certainly 009 really has grown in popularity massively, helped by Peco amongst other manufacturers, really lending it their all and producing a really great range of products that have enabled this once quite niche scale to be able to be accessible accessible by the masses. I mean, I always say this, but I do remember the Hatton's adverts where they would list some of the Peco track and a couple of kits which needed N-gauge chassis to go underneath them to complete, and then in big capital letters underneath was always, "This is all the 009 we have," as if Norman Hatton was just sick of saying to people, no, that is everything, we don't have anything else that's not in our advert. And how times have changed. Certainly the small Englands are very much an iconic locomotive of the Ffestiniog Railway, with 4 of them originally being built and 3 actually surviving to the present day. And Peco, in their partnership with Kato, produced Prince and Princess in this particular livery initially, and then they also did a reissue in the quite attractive Ffestiniog Railway green. And I remember asking Peco at the time what plans they had for modelling Palmerston, which was the missing 3rd member, and they said watch this space. And we've recently had come from Peco and Kato the next batch, not just of the small Englands, which has included Palmerston, but also the large England variants as well, which does plug a big gap in the Ffestiniog Railway fleet. Now, the Ffestiniog Railway had 4 of the small Englands, of which 3 lasted long enough that they were rebuilt into the present form. And if you're wondering about the 4th Mountaineer, that didn't last long enough to be rebuilt into the form that you see here. So the tooling that Peco and Kato have isn't suitable for representing her. But when it comes to large Englands, there were 2 of these, Welsh Pony and also Little Wonder as well. And both of those are suitable to be produced in model form, as outwardly at least they look pretty much the same, although only Welsh Pony survives. And I actually do remember Welsh Pony being plinthed at Porthmadog Station for a very long time. When you arrived there to ride on the Ffestiniog Railway, she greeted you in the car park on a plinth. And I remember as a child being quite fascinated by why they would do that to a locomotive. But more recently, she has been restored to service. And unfortunately, Little Giant, parts of her did last into the preservation period, but were scrapped. But you have to remember, in the 1950s, it was a very different age. Steam locomotives were not necessarily viewed in the same way that we do now. So, to be perfectly honest, I think we're quite lucky that not just the Ffestiniog Railway, but a sizable portion of its original fleet do survive. And of course, Palmerston very nearly went the same way, but luckily was saved and eventually restored. The packaging remains the same, and we've got here the large England Welsh Pony in the brown livery, catalogue number 51-251D. Now, Peco have produced the models in different liveries, and they're also doing a What If livery for Exmoor Pony, which is in a Southern Railway green, which would be perfect for going with anybody who chooses to model the Linston and Barnstable outline locomotives and fleet, and that would be a really good shoe-in for that. Now, I'd like to thank Peco, who very kindly loaned the channel one of these large Englands so that we can take a good close look. And I'm going to get it out of the box for the first time. As it is a loaner, we're not going to be able to do a DCC fit. Now, that was one of the criticisms that I had of the initial releases when we did the review. These are not natively DCC ready, which I thought was a great shame. And certainly, whilst hardwiring is a fairly straightforward prospect, it did seem odd that the model didn't come with at least a 6-pin header with a blanking plug on to enable that to be done relatively easily. And you can see here on Princess, I've got the DCC decoder tucked into the cab and a 6-pin socket hidden up perhaps under the cab roof would have made that a little bit more straightforward and less intrusive. Now, the large England we've got here is in this, what I actually really do like, this attractive, almost London and North Western Railway style livery. We've got the Ffestiniog Railway crest reproduced on the tender, and you can see compared to the small England, that too has the same intricate crest. The packaging has been changed between the first runs and these, and unfortunately it has come out of the box there. We do have the funnel not fully attached. It's not a big problem, this is just a push fit, and we do actually get a locating plug there, so I'll be honest, it's no great issue. Just going to line that up, and it just slots in, and if you are worried about that, then just a little dab of something like PVA would be fine to keep that in place, and certainly that is pretty robust with the design that they've chosen. Now, the big differences between the small England and the large England is not necessarily the full overall size, and it's a little bit of a misnomer about the Englands. They're not actually that much different in size. Now, there are a few differences on the full-size prototype with the cab, and just looking at this model and comparing it, I'm not 100% sure that they've been able to tool up specially for the differences. It is interesting that the two doorways at the rear of the cab, it looks slightly narrower on the small England, but I don't know whether that's a trick caused by the livery application. Certainly, scrutinising there, the rivet detail along the base, it does appear that opening is actually in the same place. And looking to the side, again, very difficult to tell the differences between the two. I don't think that the locomotives were tooled up specially for the minor differences between them, and comparing both of these, it does look like we've got pretty much the same tooling in play for both the large England and the small England. Now, the tender just clips in, so that was my fault there, just letting it perch. But what I will show is that we've got really quite a neat design of pickups on here, which does allow the tender to also contribute to picking up off the track, which massively improves reliability. The tender actually has a split chassis design, but Peco have made that work, and making use of the extra weight that that gives. If you're wondering, underneath here, it's just a solid chunk of chassis which gives some adhesive weight, and on the underside you can see that we've got pickups off the rims of the wheel. Actually, they're off the pinpoints, where these fit into a kind of bus bar that provides the electrical continuity. And that does mean that we've got a pretty free running design of wheels, so we don't get a lot of rolling resistance. We've got all of that vacuum brake detail factory fitted on the underside. Comparing that to the small England, that does look to be exactly the same. And then in terms of couplings, it ships as standard with the chopper style couplings that 009 models tend to be shipped with. But these can really easily be swapped out if you just give that a tug. The actual mounting pocket that they go into does allow standard N-gauge couplings, aftermarket couplings, and also these magnetic couplings are a straight plug-in, and I actually find on my 009 layout that the magnetic couplings are very much the most useful for ensuring maximum reliability. Moving the camera in closer, you can see that ostensibly the major difference in these models between the large England and the small England is the wheel profile, and this is the probably most obvious difference when you're looking at the full-size examples. And these have been tooled up quite nicely. We've got what appears to be a plastic centre with the correct pattern and the metal tyres that have been chemically blackened. When we look to the valve gear and connecting rods, we've got again silver finished rods, and then in the cross slide we've got made of plastic, although this has proven to be quite durable on the Small England, which I've had since they first came out. The quality of the printing finish really is quite nice. It's crisp and it's sharp. I really do like those Welsh Pony nameplates, and these aren't just a re-livery version of what came on the Small Englands, as you can see here. The nameplates on those are in the centre of the tanks, but correctly the Welsh Pony nameplates are moved up towards the front. This livery is really quite striking. We've got quite a thick red band with the white lining on the sides of it there, which isn't just a simple oval. We've got quite a flourish there in each of the corners, and then we've got an additional very thin orange line picking out the edges of these very distinctive saddle tanks, which mark these out as a very particular design. On the cab sides, this doesn't appear to have any difference from the Small Englands, and I suppose that for just a couple of examples it would have been very expensive for them to retool the cab assembly completely, so it stands to reason that the minor differences here haven't been modelled, but certainly the livery kind of does obscure that, and even though we do appear to have exactly the same shape and style of cab, the livery hides it incredibly well. Just looking at those works plates, on this particular example, they are just exactly as per the prototype. And I'm struggling actually, I can't read what they say, but it'll be really nice and interesting just to see how legible those are very close up. On this Small England, they are quite readable. You can see here Ffestiniog Railway No. 1 and Boston Lodge Works 1895. On this, we've clearly got two different plates, but they're much smaller, but nonetheless do look to be pretty sharp. Looking across the top of the saddle tank, we've got all that rivet detail again. It's nice and crisp. And then we've got the whistles separately applied just there on the cab front. I do like the lining on the front of the cab. Again, it's quite striking there, the way that it follows the curve of the saddle tank, plus around the spectacles and the brass finish around the edge of those is picked out quite nicely. The glazing does look to be nice and flush on the other side. Just bring that into focus. It's kind of hard to really show you just how small this is, other than comparing it with my fingers, which probably seem quite huge. I'm holding this as close as I can get it to the camera and still have the camera focus. This really is quite tiny, just resting it there on the palm of my hand. Even the large Englands are quite a tiny little beast. On the cab roof, we've got the outline of the ventilator, and it looks to be finished in a somewhat more matte finish compared with the gloss of the rest of the paintwork. The lining on the tender, again, really quite nice and crisp. There's a lot more going on here than we saw on the first release of the Small Englands in their maroon livery. Again, we've got the flourish in the corners on that principal lining. The Ffestiniog Railway crest there, there's a lot of detail in that, and certainly that does look nice and crisp. And then we've got the final orange line that follows around, and as per the prototype, we've got this slight dip where the front of the tender dips down as well. The rest of the tender does appear to be pretty much exactly the same as we saw on the Small England, and some of these tenders, I believe, were interchangeable between locomotives and did get chopped and changed around. On the rear, we've got its fleet number, number 5, correctly emblazoned in the centre of that panel, and the vacuum brake standards are all factory fitted as standard. In fact, From the factory, the only parts that you have as additional in the box is a full set of the Arnold N-gauge style couplings, and I suspect that these are aimed primarily more to the Japanese market, where it would be those with N-gauge tracks that would be looking to run this model as an extra on their N-gauge layouts, and this allows it to be able to be compatible with the N-gauge rolling stock. We also have this set of grab irons as well. These are for separately fitting, and they do handily give you some paperwork which gives you an idea of exactly where these need to go. They do give you some extras. We need 2 on the locomotive plus 4 across the front of the tender. But quite frankly, these locomotives are so small that I never actually fitted these on my small England, and it really hasn't been something that's rankled with me at all, with the absence of them there. On the front of the locomotive, we have a few other subtle detail differences. You can see there that the handrails on the small England are just correctly there, just on the front of the smoke box, whereas the large England has a slightly larger affair that wraps around and has additional supports across the sides as well as the front. The underside of the model employs the same arrangement that we saw on the first release of the small Englands. We've got this very, very flexible coupling between the tender and the locomotive, and as you've seen, it's quite easy to separate these just by pulling them apart, and they clip back together really well, with the means for that electrical pickups on the tender to be transferred over. The locomotive itself features metal wheels, but we do have traction tyres on the rearmost axle, and I have found that these don't seem to impinge its performance. I know a lot of people do poo-poo traction tyres, and certainly they wouldn't be my favourite, but it does mean that these have really quite reliable grip, and the only criticism I would have is that by having them both on the same axle, it does make it just a little bit more laboured for the model to get round tight curves that would be quite normal for 009. And the model might have been slightly more improved by having the traction tyres offset, with one side on one axle and the other side on the other, to be able the locomotive to slip on the corners a little bit better. You can see there as well the rest of the setup. We've got the injectors and some of the brake rigging, as well as the firebox rivet detail all built in there, and again this is all factory applied. Looking in the top of the tender, I do like these flared out tops, again capturing that Victorian look that really is quite characteristic. You can see there the way the sides just flare out, and that's been captured really, really well. The coal load itself is not removable. In fact, underneath here, all that we have is the heavy die-cast chassis, which is part of the weight, which does mean that this packs a reasonable punch. We've also got this wooden hatch at the back with its representation of the hinges. And then the front of the tender, it's actually quite generous when it comes to the space here. And in part, I guess this is because the locomotive itself has that saddle tank, so it's not really pressed for carrying water. This has all been accurately represented by Peco, and you can see there on the front we've even got that simple lining on the front panels as per the prototypes. One of the things which I do like that Kato and Peco are doing is that you can, for a cut down price, buy a chassis on its own, which is perfect for going underneath kits and scratch built models, and that has been a great boon to the market. Although it has been noted that the chassis option, where you just buy the chassis on its own, doesn't have the traction tyres, and it just seems strange that they've tooled up and made a chassis that doesn't have the traction tyres to be sold separately, but all of the complete models do have those traction tyres in place. When it comes to taking the body off, then don't be fooled by this small screw down here. That's actually holding the keeper plate in place. You don't actually need any tools for this. This is definitely an area where this model really is quite easy to deal with. Just trying to support the tender there, and it's just simply a case of carefully unclipping the body, and the mechanism and chassis just slide on out. It's just a clip fit. And inside the body, it's actually quite a tight fit in there. You can see down inside that there isn't really a lot of extra room. But when you come to DCC fit this, if that's the route you want to go, it is a little bit of a disappointment that we don't have a DCC socket. I'm just going to remove the tender there just for ease. But we do have this kind of almost a channel across the top, and it does make me wonder whether perhaps DCC fitting was considered, but for some reason they decided not to progress with that. And it is a real shame, because DCC fitting this isn't really too difficult a prospect. Despite the fact it uses a split chassis design for the pickups, you can see there that we've got two conventional wires coming off the back of the motor that go to this phosphor bronze strip that provides the pickup of the chassis. And that means that that's really quite easy to break into, to be able to isolate the motor and solder the motor inputs there and outputs to the decoder, and then the pickups straight to these phosphor bronze strips. So unlike a lot of older split chassis designed models, this is actually a really easy proposition. We've got a small but powerful motor in there connected to a worm gear, and then you can see there's not one but two brass flywheels at this end, which does really help a lot to smooth out the performance of this diminutive model. This entire chassis, as I said before, is available separately from Peco Kato, and is definitely going to be a real boon to anybody who wants to scratch build their own 009 model and use this as an easy motive power unit to go underneath. You can see we've got a lot of detail in the metal casting from the firebox at the base, and we've also got this full valve chest and a cylinder body there, all modelled and in place. It really is quite a smart little package. Getting the body back on, all we need to do is line it up, and then it's a push and click for every trip, and there we have it. When it comes to running, this locomotive might be quite diminutive, but it really does pack a welcome punch. Those traction tyres, whilst it's not something that a lot of modelers would be particularly approving of, is definitely something that adds a great deal to the pulling power of this model. And it romped away with a full rake of the Peco slate wagons along with one of their Ffestiniog railway brake vans, really like it wasn't there. On Mynydde Tatters, it took in all the track work with no issues whatsoever, and although we had to run this on DC because as a loaner model I didn't feel confident to do a hardwire to then have to reverse that, but if you're going down the DCC route, it really isn't a massively difficult proposition. It just rankles a little bit that they didn't provide something like a 6-pin socket with blanking plate to allow DCC modelers to have a much easier time of things. I guess that in part is down to its Japanese partner Kato, and strangely enough the Japanese market does seem to be very firmly in the DC camp, and I find that a little bit strange for a nation that does seem to like its gadgets, that when it comes to model railways they do prefer good old-fashioned DC. But the model itself really isn't hampered by that and does run incredibly well. The flywheel and that heavy brass worm really do give a degree of momentum to the mechanism, and I was able to find this model quite controllable even down to some quite low speeds, and it quite happily chugged around Mynydde Tatters really quite happily. And judging by the performance of the small England, which I've had for quite some time, they really are not fazed by heavy functioning on an exhibition layout running for hour after hour. Swapping out the couplings is ridiculously easy. They do give you the Arnold style N-gauge couplings, so this would be perfect for perhaps N-gauge modelers who want to dip their toe in the waters of 009. And likewise, I actually find that the magnetic Hunt couplings from West Hill Wagon Works are a great alternative that give firm, reliable coupling first time every time, and it does mean that these will run reliably for hour after hour at exhibitions with no issues whatsoever. So we turn now to the scores, and first up is build quality, and actually this is quite a rugged and reliable model, and certainly it withstood all of my heavy handling, and you can see just how small and tiny this is compared to my fingers, which look positively huge next to it. And it really did just not care in the slightest. Even things like those whistles have a lot of spring to them, which means they stand up to quite a few knocks. And I do particularly like this tender drawbar. With its electrical connections, it's simple yet very reliable, and we get a lot of flexibility, as you can see there, such that this model is able to take in even some quite roughly laid track without it really causing any great issues. The only area where I had a small problem was out of the box. The funnel was not in place, but this is quite an easy fix, and the design of it is such that actually it isn't really too bothered. It's not like it's broken off, it just slides in place and is pretty good and strong. I really do like the clip-on body too, which makes getting inside this an absolute doddle. And all in all, I thought it was a great performance from Peco and Kato, and I'm going to give it a 9.2. On running quality, this is where the model does shine. Despite its diminutive size, it does perform really well. That very small motor is nonetheless very powerful, and actually the traction tyres work to the advantage of this model, with the only criticism being that had they staggered them across the two axles, it might have been a little bit less pressured on some of the tighter curves, as it would have given that little bit extra slip, as trains don't have differentials to get round tighter corners. The pickups in the tender too really do help this out, and certainly made sure that this was a good, reliable performer. It's also nice to see that they found a lot of room to add in the brass flywheels and that heavy brass worm gear, which really does add to the momentum of that gear chain. All in all, it was a pretty smooth runner, and there really wasn't too much in the way of faults, with only those traction tyres being a little bit of a sticking point, and I'm going to give it a 9.8. On DCC fitting and innovation, unfortunately Peco and Kato have chosen not to add DCC readiness to this model, even though it is a relatively easy DCC hardwire, and there's even some space on top of the motor and chassis assembly that would have lent itself to something like a 6-pin decoder socket that would have given the end user the option of maybe using a micro 6-pin decoder that would have just plugged in. Instead, unfortunately, this is a DC only model unless you feel confident enough to take on that DCC fit. Although be aware that unless you use a micro sized decoder, you are going to have to put something into the cab, but this is quite roomy, and the design of the cab is such that it does hide any decoders quite well should you need to put them in here, but it comes back to being quite a shame that there isn't DCC compatibility on this. Innovation-wise, I do like the setup that they've got between the tender and locomotive. It's simple, it's reliable, it's rugged, and it does mean that we get a good electrical pickup of 8 wheels instead of just the 4. We've also got a huge amount of weight in here, which really does add to the traction and reliability. And it's also very useful that they provide the spare chassis, something I've not particularly seen from any other manufacturers, but it comes back to the sticking point of that DCC fitting, so I'm going to give this 6.5. On accuracy and quality of finish, well, the quality of finish really is really nice, and looking at the photographs of the other liveries too, every single one does stand out as incredibly striking, and I like them all. When it comes to some of the detail differences, we've got the correct pattern wheels on these, and then we've also got this additional handrail at the top of the smoke box, which marks it out from the Small Englands too. The positioning of the nameplates too is a really nice attention to detail. Now the cab is not strictly speaking accurate, but it is a very minor difference when you see the Small Englands next to the Large Englands, so it is something that can be forgiven, and I'm going to give this an 8.2. On value for money, the RRP of these models is £170, but they can be found discounted down to £153, and we do have a link in the description box to help you find all the different versions that are out now of both the new run of the Small Englands and these all new Large Englands, and I'm sure that they will find a welcome home on a multitude of narrow gauge railways. Certainly, the previous batches of the Prince and Princess Small Englands sold incredibly well, so much so that they very quickly sold out at a lot of retailers. And when you compare to the kind of price point that we see from other manufacturers for 009 models, it's not an unreasonable price. And certainly, I do think that these are going to have no trouble in selling. So I'm going to give this a 7.6, which still gives us a very reasonable overall score of 41.3. It's definitely a great model, and one which I'm really pleased to see that Peco and Kato's partnership has continued to bring to the market. Well, I hope you really enjoyed today's video and found it informative, and certainly it's a really great offering from the Peco-Kato collaboration to bring another variant of the Ffestiniog railway locomotive fleet to the market. And I really do wonder sometimes what Norman Hatton might have made of the proliferation of ready-to-run 009 models when he was typing all those years ago that this is all the 009 we have. I know I do keep coming back to that advert, but it just shows how much the hobby has moved on. And 009 is that new bold frontier that really is catering well for the modeler. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments section down below. What do you think of these models? Did you get one of the Small Englands when they first came out? And is this perhaps something that you've added to your fleet as well? Or maybe it's something you're looking to do just that? Or are you a newcomer to the 009 scene? I'd love to hear from you down below. Let me know about what you're modelling too. It really is, for me at least, a great scale gauge combination, and I always love to hear from any other modelers out there who are dipping their toe into the seas of 009. But until next time, this is me, Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Don't forget to check out the link down below to where you can find all of the models featured in today's video, and hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. You can also head on over to Patreon and help support the channel to keep making the videos that you want to see. And we've also got our full merch store for Billy's replacement speakers, Gronk It Up, one of our most popular designs, and of course all the others as well on t-shirts, hoodies and mugs. But until next time, this is me, Kirk, saying you take great care of yourself. Happy modelling. Bye for now. Today's video comes in association with Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories that are designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. Find the full range available to order now at tramfabriek.co.uk. Additional support is provided by...
This is Clark Railworks, and this is what we do. You'll know us from Ellis Clark Trains, and you'll get the same friendly expertise with us too. We've got a huge range of pre-owned model railways from all your favourite manufacturers, and maybe some you hadn't heard of before. It's the place to come for quality. We don't stock substandard models, and everything we sell is fully tested and photographed by model railway experts. No matter whether you model 00 gauge, N, HO or more, we have sought after models from all around the world with new listings added every weekday. Check out what's available now at clarkrailworks.com, and don't miss out on your latest loco.
I'd like to thank everybody over on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to our Patreon heroes. Without you guys over on Patreon, we really wouldn't be able to keep making the video content that you see on this channel. And don't forget that you can also head on over to patreon.com/JenniferKirk and check out the different tiers of rewards. Thank you so much. You are absolute legends.